In this video, you will learn what a person's traces say about him. What happens if you cut off fingerprints? How do you confuse the trackers? What do modern bounty hunters look like? What do bullet marks tell us? And is it even possible to commit a crime that no one will ever solve? This happy-go-lucky family man is Bradford King, a former police officer and then a criminology professor at Western Michigan University. His favorite exercise was to ask students to come up with the perfect crime scenario. That is, one that could not be solved without the criminal himself admitting to it. Of course, the forensic students were eager to offer their versions. While teaching at the institute, his life was getting better, and his wife Diane King became a popular TV presenter. The couple moved to the big country house and raised their second child. But the good times didn't last long. Diane had a crazy fan who called the house, offering her dinner and meeting, and once broke a window and climbed right into the house. But what really scared the couple was a note typed in letters from newspaper headlines. "You should have gone to lunch with me." And another year later, Brad discovered his wife's body in front of the house. Next to it was a car containing their 2 children. The murder of the TV presenter made a lot of noise, and the police took up the case. The investigation revealed that the sniper fired from a neighboring stable. .22 caliber shell casing was found there, and in a nearby creek, the gun itself. The dog followed the trail and circled back to the house. So the perp circled back to the crime scene. He watched the police, and no one tracked him down. But most importantly, forensics couldn't connect the bullets to the gun. They were badly deformed, and it was impossible to understand anything. And the investigation reached a dead end and took an unexpected turn. But before you recognize it, let's be the very forensic students Brad taught. And let's try to understand for ourselves what the perfect crime means. You'd think a volcano vent would be the perfect crime scene, because no one will ever find any trace of the crime. Well, it is, but you can't get there undetected. And it's not even about the watchers. Every second we give ourselves away by leaving traces. Traceology, the forensic section, is all about traces. They're handprints, footprints, teeth, blood, and some are left by the object itself. Others leave only an outline. Even on the moon, man left traces. However, their study is engaged in another science. A good criminalist is a man with wings. At a crime scene, he hovers above the floor and looks for other people's traces without leaving his own. The most important thing for traceologists are shoe impressions. They can tell not only the brand of sneakers, but also gender, weight, height, direction of movement, and even the features of a person's gait. If the trace is left on a flat surface, it is photographed and then remove a special film or a device with a funny name tracescope. If the traces are on the ground, they are taken to the laboratory together with the soil. It's even possible to recognize height from footprints. Yes, and it's possible. Here's the formula. You put the length of the foot here, the width here. Multiply the length of the foot by 3.1. Multiply the width by 4 and add 53. That's your height. Footprints can even be used to determine a person's occupation. Sailors who are used to keeping their balance on deck rest on the outside of the foot. Skaters and hockey players, on the contrary, on the inside, as if they were pushing off the ice with a skate. It's not just biological traces that give criminals away. It's tool marks. Look at the broken lock. You can see the marks of a lockpick. The fewer tool marks, the calmer and more experienced the unsub was. But some people don't bother and cut the door leaf or drill out the shank. That's how a padlock gets picked in 3 seconds. Tire tracks can tell you a lot too. Tire tracks depend on the wear and speed of the car. At 5 kilometers per hour, the contact patch is a normal square. But at 125 kilometers an hour, the car is flying. It's like a Rorschach test. The arms race works here too. And knowing these techniques, criminals learn how to get around them too. They walk backwards, tie another shoe to their own, but with the toes backwards. They put on shoe covers, cut off soles, throw away tools, change tires, change cars, but it's very hard to get rid of invisible traces. Smell is the oldest of the senses. Even bacteria have the ability to sense molecules of substances. Every person's odor is unique. You can't change it and you can't get rid of it. In forensics, odorology deals with odors. The most reliable odor preserves clothing, furniture, and blood. As it curdles, it seals the scent. It's called the spilled blood phenomenon. In this way, the blood seals the odor of the perpetrator and helps to find him. An object with the perpetrator's scent is wrapped in foil. And in the lab, the scent is sealed onto cotton cloths. The odor stays in the freezer for 5 years. The next thing you do is compare the odors. Humans can't tell the difference. And that's where the dogs come in. Their olfactory system is 100 square centimeters, whereas ours is only 4. And it's not just sheepdogs. It could be any dog. For a dog, scent retrieval is a game. Flasks of cloth are placed in a circle. The dog handler and the dog take turns going around all of them. And he doesn't know where the odor is. And if one dog freezes, that's a signal. The flasks are changed and the experiment is repeated. If 3 out of 3 fall out, the odor is found. A device that recognizes smell like a dog has been tried for decades. The simplest of these devices is the police alcohol analyzer, the breathalyzer. But it reacts only to one specific substance, while odor consists of hundreds of components. To fool the dogs, the perpetrators scatter food. They spray themselves with air freshener to break the odor, and swim across a river to throw the dog off the scent altogether. These are the kind of tricks criminals have been using for hundreds of years. Okay, but what's the first thing that comes to mind when we say the word forensics? Yeah, fingerprints. They're studied by dactyloscopy. They're simple to leave, easy to detect, and difficult to remove. They are formed before we are born, in the 3rd month of pregnancy. Nowadays, we finger unlock smartphones, but the idea itself is 150 years old. Here's William Herschel, grandson of astronomer William Herschel, who discovered the planet Uranus. While working in colonial India, he noticed that the locals signed documents indiscriminately and didn't feel obliged to do anything afterward. So Herschel came up with a clever trick. He got the Hindus to put a fingerprint under their signature. The Hindus thought the fingerprint was sacred, so they would do what they signed. And so Herschel changed the game. Each print is a set of patterns, waves or arcs, loops or whirls. It's a set of patterns that distinguishes one print from another. And the ratio of patterns varies from nation to nation. See, the prints of the Eskimos consist mostly of whirls, and the Europeans are dominated by loops. And guess whose fingerprints these are? Hindu, Norwegian, Native Australian. No, it's a koala. It needs the patterns on its fingers to climb eucalyptus trees. So all it needs to do to go undetected is remove the fingerprints from its fingers, right? Believe me, you're not the first person to think that. That nice woman is Barker, one of the most wanted gangsters of the 30s. When her son and his lover were on the run, they asked Joseph Moran, an alcoholic who treated gangsters, to get rid of the patterns on their fingers. The doctor cut the skin off their fingers, and Mother Barker relieved their agony with morphine. But the agony was in vain, for the same papillary lines appeared on the new skin, which had overgrown. Disgruntled bandits took Moran in a drunken state, took him to Lake Michigan, and drowned the poor man. That's the story. Too bad they didn't know fingerprints change over time. All they had to do was lay low for 10 years. But there's an easier way. Use gloves. It works. So you've reached the halfway point of the issue. So it's time to have some fun. What do you think this is? A child's doodle? A cartoon sketch? No, it's just the worst sketch ever. But the funny thing is, it was actually used to find the perpetrator. Phuoc Guayin stole money from a mall. But the basic facial features are correct. Straight mouth, eyes in a bunch, and most of all, a frightened look. Witness statements and sketches are handled by habitoscopy. Perhaps the most widely circulated sketches, of course. are these dead or alive posters from the Wild West. In those days, you didn't even have to write down what the wanted person had done. It was enough to put a good price on his head. Did you ever wonder who was paying for it? That much money. The criminals themselves. Have you ever heard of it? A criminal is released on bail. Now, if he escapes that bail, that's what they use to hire bounty hunters. Yes, that way, the state doesn't spend taxpayer money to catch him, and the criminal pays for his own search. Bounty hunters still exist legally in the Philippines and in the US. And here's Dwayne Chapman, nicknamed Dog. He caught 8,000 men with his bare hands. But these days, of course, criminals aren't found by drawing. Forensic scientists draw up a portrait on cards or tapes. You take mustache number 1, put on nose number 3, and eyes number 5, and you get the dude you're looking for. The easiest way to do this is in the Faces program. We're looking for clear eyes, a straight nose, lips, and chin, and finally long hair. Recognize him. That's Jesus Christ. That's how Catholics describe him. And this is the African Jesus. That's how the Africans describe him. What's the point of all this? Because we all have different images of the same person in our heads. And witnesses in a state of passion can't remember all the details. Plus, the perpetrator can wear glasses, a mustache, a beard, or just a mask. However, let's look at one story. When in 1929, Al Capone's men, disguised as policemen, shot 7 people from the gang of Max Moran. Many bullets were left at the crime scene, and the criminals would never have been found if not for the bullets. Ballistics is all about figuring out what was fired and how it was fired. Bullets, casings, and bores are photographed. The powder gases will tell you the distance of the shot. This is a point-blank shot, and this is from a meter away. And here you'll notice the rifling. These grooves are the barrel's individual stamp. Found bullets are rotated 360 degrees and photographed. Ballistas find the gun and fire it into the bullet catcher. And then they compare the pattern on the bullet they found at the scene. If they match, the gun is found. That's how forensics was able to put Al Capone's crew away. Now imagine that someone watched this issue and decided to use this knowledge to leave no marks. He waited and found the perfect time with no witnesses around. Put on a mask and gloves, overpowered his odor with ammonia. He scratched the notches on the bullets, disposed of his weapon, and fled across the river. So he's untraceable now. Of course not. Even standing in one place, not moving, you're scattering your DNA. How much skin, saliva, and hair do you think it would take to identify you? Only 8 cells. Humans are 99.9% alike. It's the 0.1% that makes us different. This is what you look like in the language of genes. These dashes are you. Biomaterial needs to be bagged and collected as soon as possible. It could be a hair or a microscopic piece of skin. Then, in the lab, a reagent is used to destroy the cells and release the DNA. The material is scanned with a device, and the results are compared with other samples. By DNA, it is possible to find out gender, ethnicity, blood type, and if it is in the database, a specific person. Psychiatrist Cesare Lombroso said in the 19th century that criminals are born, not made. Geneticists can partially agree with them. Yes, a person may be born aggressive, but what he becomes depends on his environment and his decisions. Do you remember the perfect crime from the beginning of the video? Policeman wifes a TV anchorwoman. It's time to tell it. And how did the whole story end? The FBI, 10 months after the murder, decided to take another look at the anonymous letter. Notes like this are left by someone whose handwriting can be identified. It suggests the killer knew the victim well. And the sloppy lettering is just an attempt to confuse the investigation. And who knew Diane well, knew forensics, and was looking for a way to commit the perfect crime. The same policeman Bradford King. Turns out he was cheating on his wife and hooking up with students all the time. And it was then remembered that he was never around during the calls. And even later, a real gun was discovered in one of the houses in the neighborhood that had been fired. There was a reason Brad had asked the students to come up with the perfect crime. They were the ones who helped kill his wife. They were the ones who advised imitating the behavior of a crazy fan, running away across a body of water, and then back to the scene of the crime. And in another paper, a student advised planting a second gun at the scene of the crime, which would have been impossible to prove. But even an experienced forensic scientist couldn't have foreseen everything. And despite the fact that the prosecution was based on circumstantial evidence, Brad King was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison. He is currently alive and remains in prison, having never admitted his guilt. Any perfect crime ceases to be one when it is solved by forensic scientists. But there is one case that is considered perfect. It's the case of D.B. Cooper. In 1971, he hijacked an airplane, got a $200,000 ransom for the passengers, let them go, took off with the plane and parachuted in quietly, leaving the pilots alone. In 40 years of investigation, he was never found. All that's left is a sketch. That's all for today. And as usual, pump your brains. Bye.